Hello and welcome to lesson number 6. We are still in the Middle Bronze Age, but let me take you now to Jerusalem. In this period, Jerusalem was built as a city. It is also the period when Jerusalem is mentioned in extra-biblical sources outside the Bible. We mentioned them earlier. This is the execration archive, the execration texts from Egypt. Jerusalem is mentioned as Ushamum, perhaps Rushalimum. This is the Egyptian pronunciation of the name, so we should remember that. It's not necessarily exactly the way the local Canaanites pronounce the name. And it's interesting to find that the oldest name in record of this city is indeed Jerusalem. It's not Yevus. It is simply Jerusalem as we know it today. For the last 4,000 years, this city was named Jerusalem. It's quite amazing that such an old name is still preserved and in daily use today. The kings of Jerusalem are mentioned, Yekaram and Shasan. So like many other places, Jerusalem had 2 kings and not 1. What is the significance of this fact? Were they a father and a child? Were they 2 brothers? Or perhaps it means that there were 2 clans or 2 leading families in the Canaanite city of Jerusalem, and each family had its own representative in the government of this city. We will probably never know. Anyhow, the question is, why did the Canaanites decide to build a city in Jerusalem, south of Mount Moriah, adjacent to the Kidron Valley? Was there something important here? Well, we've already discussed this question in the introduction to archaeology. We will look again at this explanation right now before we continue on our study of Canaanite Jerusalem. How people chose where to settle, the example of Jerusalem. Now, what we see here is the rendering of the Canaanite city of Jerusalem in the Middle Bronze Age in this case. It is showing us at first glance the topography in Jerusalem and its close surrounding. So right in the middle we can see the Canaanite city fortified by walls. This is a city built in the 18th century BCE. That's the Middle Bronze Age or the Middle Canaanite period. To the right of the city we see the Mount of Olives. Between the city and the Mount of Olives there's a valley. This valley is called the Kidron Valley. To the left of the city, there's another valley. It's called the Tyropoeon Valley. Tyropoeon comes from Greek. It is a name mentioned by Josephus Flavius, the great Jewish historian of the Second Temple period. Tyropoeon means perhaps the cheesemakers. So if this is indeed the translation, then it's the cheesemakers valley. This valley is also known as the Central Valley. To the left of the Tyropoeon or the Central Valley, we can see a vast hill. This is the Western Hill of Jerusalem. The Western Hill of Jerusalem is to the west of the city, and the city itself is on what we call today the City of David, or the Southeastern Hill of Jerusalem. East because it is east to the Western Hill, south because it is south of the Temple Mount. Now, you don't see the temple in this picture as it wasn't yet built. It will be built about 800 years later at the beginning of the First Temple period. However, we can see to the north of the city, far away, we can see the mountain that will later become the Temple Mount or Mount Moriah as it is known in the biblical times. Below the city, closer to us, we can see a blue dot. That blue dot is the pool of Siloam, which we believe existed already in the time of the Canaanites. It got its water via a channel that was constructed by the Canaanites, a channel called the Canaanite Channel or the Channel number 2, that takes the water of the spring, Gihon Spring, down to the south to this reservoir. So these are the basic conditions, topographical conditions, this is the setting in which Jerusalem was established as a city. Is it protected well? Does it have a natural protection? Well, definitely on the right-hand side, on the eastern side, the Kidron Valley, and on the west side, to the left, the Tyropoeon Valley, they both supply the city with excellent protection. This is also true with regards to the southern side of the city. We can clearly see it is protected by the merger of the two valleys that create a sufficient defense. The question is, what happens in the north? Was Jerusalem separated in any way from the Temple Mount? Now, we lack archaeological evidence. We do not have archaeological evidence with regard to this location, as it has never been properly excavated. But there are indications, they're not very clear, but there are indications that perhaps there's some kind of a valley, either natural or artificial, by the way. Perhaps it was hewn by the people of Jerusalem, that does indeed separate Jerusalem from the northern part. If this is the case, then definitely Jerusalem is very well protected. Protected certainly on three sides and probably also on the fourth. Now, the second consideration is a source of water. So in the case of Jerusalem, there's no problem. Jerusalem was built on a hill where there's a spring, the greatest spring in the Jerusalem mountains. It's called the Gihon Spring. It supplied Jerusalem with 600,000 cubic meters of water annually. Every year you had that capacity, so it's more than sufficient for a small city. Now, Jerusalem in the Canaanite period was around 70,000 square meters in size. That's 70 dunams. It's not very big. The population is estimated around, say, 1,000 people, perhaps even less than that. So the amount of water is more than abundant. There's no need for more. When Jerusalem evolves in later generations, of course, that will no longer be true, and the Jerusalemites will have to find some other solutions to bring water from afar to this city. What about the fertile agricultural land? Do we have that in Jerusalem? Well, actually we do. Of course, not inside the city, but the fields were probably located in the Kidron Valley to the right, again to the east of the city, and on the terraces that were built on the slopes of the western hill. So more than sufficient area for agriculture in ancient Jerusalem. What about proximity to a main road? Well, Jerusalem was not built on a main road, unlike Megiddo, but it's not too far from a main road. The main road is the Patriarch's Road, or Road 60, that crosses the mountain ridge of the land of Israel from south to north. This is the road taken probably by Abraham, according to the book of Genesis, when he comes to the area of Mount Moriah, or the mountain in the land of Moriah, as the book of Genesis defines it, for the binding of Isaac. Where exactly is the main road? Where is the Patriarch's Road? Well, you don't see it in the picture. It's beyond the left-hand side of the picture, beyond the western hill. And over there, it's the region of the old train station, Keren Hayesod Street. That's the main thoroughfare. At first glance, it looks like it's a disadvantage, too far away. But actually, it's not the case. Jerusalem is about 10 to 15 minutes walk from the main thoroughfare, from the main road. So we can imagine that caravans of merchants going through the main road, the Patriarch's Road, would be stopped by a local force of Jerusalemites, pay their taxes, and move on. The city doesn't have to be actually on the main road to benefit from its from that commerce. People walking along the main road would, of course, have the ability to go to Jerusalem, a 15-minute walk, and spend the night there. Yes, Jerusalem is not on the main road, and some scholars consider that to be a disadvantage, but in reality, as I just showed, it's not really the case. So all in all, we do see that Jerusalem does answer the four main criteria of choosing a locality for a settlement. And here we come to the fifth criteria, the fifth element in the development of Jerusalem, and this is the matter, the tradition of sanctity. Now, we all know that the Bible hints that Jerusalem is holy because in the Bible it says that the Temple of Solomon was built on Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is not explicitly mentioned previously, but as we said earlier in the story of the binding of Isaac, it is said that the location of the binding was on a mountain in the land of Moriah. So obviously the Bible wants us to understand that Jerusalem, or the Temple of Solomon, was built in a place that was already holy because of the story of the binding of Isaac. However, modern scholars tend to see the link between the two stories as a later addition of the biblical writer, and if so, in that case, the element of sanctity played no major role in the decision to build a temple on Mount Moriah. It is a later addition, probably from the second half of the first temple period. So now that we've refreshed our memory with regards to why Jerusalem was chosen as a site for a city, let us proceed to the study of the city itself. Excavations in the city of David, this is ancient Jerusalem, this is Canaanite Jerusalem, this is really where it all began, started in the 19th century, and they never stopped. They still go on today, not continuously, of course, but this is, as I think I mentioned earlier, the perhaps most excavated site in the world. The excavations revealed remains, impressive remains, from Canaanite Jerusalem. We have the walls with megalithic stones. We have impressive and sophisticated water system. It's called the Warren Shaft system, and the adjacent fortress of the spring. We have the spring itself, the irrigation channel called the Canaanite channel or channel number 2, and the Shiloach pool, possibly. We're not certain about that. So without further ado, let me take you on a tour to Jerusalem through a series of video clips about Jerusalem's city walls, the Warren Shaft system, the spring fortress, the Canaanite channel, and the Shiloach pool. This is the city of David, where it all began. This is the ancient core of Jerusalem. This is where Jerusalem was actually born. Outside the walls of the old city behind my back and the Temple Mount over there. So in this case, like many other cases around the country, we need to make the distinction between the old city and the real ancient city. The city of David is also the most excavated site in this country, perhaps in the entire world. Evidence of early human activity was found here. It is dating from the Epi-Paleolithic era, about 15,000 years ago, perhaps even earlier than that. Later, people resided here during the Chalcolithic era. Even later, in the early Bronze Age, first stone houses were built here. And then, in the Middle Bronze Age, the first city of Jerusalem emerges. It is a Canaanite city. It had a thick wall surrounding it, and it also enjoyed a magnificent water system. The Bible relates that King David occupied Jerusalem. That must have happened around the year 1000 BCE, according to traditional dating. He turned Jerusalem into a capital of the tribes of Israel. Later, his son, Solomon, builds the temple. Now, this is the place where the kings of Judah reigned. This is where the prophets like Isaiah, Yeshayahu, Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, prophesied. And this is where many chapters of the Bible were written. That made Jerusalem what it is today for the three great monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Later, in the Second Temple period, people inhabited the city, this region too, and it was part of Jerusalem until the year 70, when the city was destroyed by the Romans. Later, in the late Roman period, the Byzantine period, the early Muslim period, throughout these eras, this hill was also part of the city, until the 11th century, in the Fatimid era, when Jerusalem shrank for historical reasons and this place was abandoned. Since then, for the last 1,000 years, until the 19th century, the city of David was not inhabited. And then, in the 19th century, the archaeological study of the city of David began. I'm standing here on the eastern slope of the city of David, and I'm facing a large wall built of large stones. This wall is the Middle Bronze Age wall of Canaanite Jerusalem. It was built around the 18th century BCE, and therefore this is the earliest wall ever built in Jerusalem. Actually, what you're witnessing here is the emergence of Jerusalem as a city. Interestingly enough, this is roughly the time when Jerusalem is also mentioned in extra-biblical sources, that is, in sources that are not the Bible. And I refer to the execration texts from Egypt. In the execration texts, or the texts of the curses from Egypt, Jerusalem is mentioned as one of many cities in the region, and its kings are also named. One of them is Yekar-Am, the other one is Shas'an. So this is the wall, but at first glance, its location looks very odd. It leaves the spring, the Gihon spring, outside the city's perimeter. Why would anyone leave the spring, the source of life of the city, outside the walls? The explanation is quite simple. The spring is located down below, almost at the bottom of the Kidron Valley. A wall has to be located on a higher elevation so as to make it harder for the enemy to ascend to. That's why the spring was left outside. But wait a second. If the spring is outside, what did the Canaanites do when the city was besieged by enemies? Where did they get water from? How could they reach the spring securely during times of siege? We now know the answer. It's called the Warren Shaft system and the Canaanite fortress. Let me take you there to explore the Canaanite fortress of the water. A moment ago, I was standing next to the city's wall from the Middle Bronze Age. I'm still standing now on the eastern slope of the city of David, but I moved up, and here I am at the area of the city itself. And right here, next to me, is a modern Turkish period entranceway leading into the water system built by the Canaanites. It's called the Warren Shaft system. The system was named after Captain Charles Warren, who was the first to investigate it in 1867. Let's go inside. The Warren Shaft system has two major components. The first is this, the upper tunnel or the access tunnel. The second is the Warren Shaft itself. At the bottom of the Warren Shaft there's water. They're diverted there by another tunnel coming from the Gihon spring. So we can imagine people starting up there at the top of the tunnel inside the city, protected by the walls. Along their way here, they would come out of the walls, but they're still protected by the bedrock. So they would end up standing at the top of the shaft, draw water, and return home safely. I'm standing now inside the Warren shaft system near the top of the vertical shaft called Warren's shaft. Now, for many years, scholars believed that the entire system was hewn into the bedrock in one phase during the First Temple period, or the Iron Age II period. Recent excavations, though, showed that we were probably wrong. Actually, there are two different phases in the evolution of this system. The earlier phase is the Canaanite phase from the 18th century BCE, the Middle Bronze Age. And the later phase, 1,000 years later, is from the Iron Age II, that is probably the 8th century BCE. In the earlier phase, only the upper tunnel, or the access tunnel, existed. That was the Canaanite phase, and the Canaanites didn't even suspect that there's a natural shaft right below their feet. Later, in the Iron Age II period, when the Jerusalemites lowered down the floor of the system, they stumbled upon this natural feature and used it. So, if this is the case, when the Canaanites walked up there at the tunnel, where did they go? They didn't know there's a shaft, so there must have been another goal. To find out where they went, let's go out into the eastern slope of the city of David. Right here, on the eastern slope of the city of David, outside the walls of the city, in an area that obviously in the past used to be under the open sky, we get the answer to the question, to where did the upper tunnel of the Warren shaft system lead in the time of the Canaanites, in the Middle Bronze Age? Excavations here revealed the remains of a massive fortification from the Canaanite period. It's a large fortress. It was approached from the Warren shaft system via a narrow passageway which was fortified on both sides. This is the fortified corridor, or the fortified passageway. Around the spring, the Canaanites built a huge tower, the Springs Tower. I'm standing on the eastern wall of the Springs Tower. It's about 7 meters thick. That huge tower was around the spring, hence it locked the spring's water inside. So the level of the water rose, and then it was diverted to the south through the Canaanite Channel, or Channel number 2, to the southern end of the city of David, to the Pool of Siloam. But, and here's the trick, some of the water was actually diverted here to a nearby Canaanite pool, a reservoir. That reservoir, the Canaanite reservoir, was also protected by walls. So the entire water system is now protected. This is the way the Canaanites in the Middle Bronze Age secured their water during times of siege. Now, I know this is quite complicated and it's very difficult to put things together. So, in order to help you understand everything, let me show you a reconstruction I prepared especially for this case. And in this reconstruction, we will see, using animation, the different portions of the fortifications and the way they actually worked in antiquity. השנה היא 1800 לפני הספירה, והמלך הכנעני של ירושלים הקדומה לא רגוע. מלחמה בפתח. ירושלים אומנם בנויה על גבעה ובעלת חומה חזקה, אך מקור המים העיקרי של העיר, מעיין הגיחון, נובע בתחתית המדרון, מחוץ לחומת העיר. במקרה של מלחמה, כל אויב יוכל בקלות להשתלט על המעיין ולייבש את העיר. יועצו הבכיר של המלך מציע פתרון פשוט, לשנות את תוואי החומה כך שתכלול גם את המעיין. מה שהיועץ שכח הוא שהחומה נבנתה בכוונה במעלה הגבעה כדי להקשות על חיילי האויב לטפס אל העיר. חומה שתיבנה במיקום נמוך יותר תחשוף את החיילים המגינים אליה לירי.
המלך, שלא שכח את כל הנתונים האלה, מתאכזב מיועצו הבכיר ומפטר אותו. יועצו השני של המלך מציע רעיון אחר. לחצוב מנהרה תת-קרקעית. את מי המעיין יזרימו אל תחתיתו של בור טבעי עמוק, פיר, הנמצא בתוך הסלע. המנהרה החצובה תרד גם היא בתוך הסלע, מתחת לאדמה, עד לראשו של הפיר, ובנקודה זו יוכלו תושבי העיר לשאוב ממנו מים בביטחון. האויב לעומת זאת לא יוכל להתקרב אל המנהרה. קירותיו הגבוהים והזקופים של הפיר ישמשו מכשול בלתי עביר. המלך מרוצה, היועץ נושם לרווחה, והמפעל יוצא לדרך.
כך שחזרו החוקרים בעבר את האופן שבו פעלה מערכת פיר וורן. אבל על מה התבסס השחזור? ובכן, הכל התחיל בשנת 1867, כאשר הקפטן האנגלי צ'ארלס וורן ועוזרו הנרי בירטלס נכנסו למעיין הגיחון. הם זחלו לאורך כ-20 מטרים, כשלפתע גילו בקיר ממול, בסלע, פרצה, ומאחוריה תחתיתו של פיר אנכי שמטפס ועולה לגובה 13 מטרים. באמצעות פיגומים מאולתרים בגובה 3 קומות, טיפסו ועלו וורן ובירטלס במעלה הפיר. כאן בראשו הם גילו את המשך המערכת. מנהרה תת-קרקעית, נסתרת, ארוכה ומפותלת, העולה ומטפסת בתלילות אל תוך העיר. וורן חיבר את כל הממצאים שבידו, והגיע למסקנה שמדובר במערכת מתוחכמת אחת. ראשיתה בתוך העיר, במנהרה משופעת שיורדת אל בטן האדמה. משם היא ממשיכה בסיבוב רחב, ומגיעה לכאן אל הפיר. הפיר הוא לב המערכת. באמצעות גלגלת שהייתה מחוברת לטבעת שהייתה נעוצה בתקרת הפיר, יכולים היו להוריד ולהעלות חבל עם דלי או אולי נוד מים, וכך לשאוב מים מן הפיר. במשך שנים ניסו החוקרים להבין מי עומד מאחורי מפעל המים המיוחד הזה. החוקר הצרפתי לואי ונסן הציע שמדובר בכנענים, מאות שנים לפני המלך דוד. החוקר הישראלי, יגאל שילה, הציע לעומת זאת שמדובר דווקא באחד ממלכי יהודה, 100-200 שנים אחרי ימי דוד. למרות הוויכוחים בין החוקרים, על דבר אחד הסכימו כולם. הפיר האנכי שבו טיפס וורן היה לב ליבו של מפעל המים הקדום. ואז הגיעו הארכיאולוגים רוני רייך ואלי שוקרון.
בשנת 1995 נשלחתי הנה על ידי רשות העתיקות לבצע חפירת הצלה, כאן ליד המעיין. למען האמת לא חשבתי שנמצא משהו מיוחד. ככלות הכל אנחנו נמצאים כאן מחוץ לתחומי העיר, בעמק. אבל ככל שהעמקנו לחפור באפר, הלך והתגלה מחזה מרהיב.
רייך ושוקרון גילו שרידים של מגדל ענק שהקיף את מעיין הגיחון מכל עבריו.
אבני המגדל הגדולות האלה, שמשקלן 4 ו-5 טונות האחת, הן הגדולות ביותר שנעשה בהן שימוש בירושלים לפני ימיו של המלך הורדוס.
מתוך השרידים שחזרו רייך ושוקרון מערך אדיר של ביצורים למרגלות חומת העיר מן התקופה הכנענית. הוא כלל מגדל ענק ותעלת מים, היא התעלה הכנענית, שהזרימה את מי הגיחון לעבר בריכה כנענית חצובה שנתגלתה בסמוך. משם הוזרמו המים דרומה לבריכת השילוח, שנשארה באותה תקופה בלתי מוגנת. מתברר שמעיין הגיחון, שהכל היו בטוחים שנשאר מחוסר הגנה, היה מוגן בצורה מרשימה. אבל אם כל זה נכון, מדוע המלך הכנעני ויועצו ירדו לשאוב מים דרך פיר תת-קרקעי אפל וצר, כשממש כאן בסמוך ישנו מכלול של מעיין, בריכת מים גדולה, וכל זה מוגן הגנה מצוינת. ובכן, החפירות החדשות מלמדות שכנראה הם לא.
עם התקדמות החפירה, ההבנה של מערכת פיר וורן השתנתה. הגענו למסקנה שהפיר עצמו, הפיר האנכי, הוא אין לו שום משמעות בתוך מערכת המים של ירושלים בתקופות הקדומות.
לפי סימני החציבה על דפנות המנהרה, אנחנו יודעים שהחוצבים הכנעניים חצבו אותה משני הצדדים. אבל הם התרכזו בחציבה רק בחלק העליון של הסלע, שמסתיים בקו הזה, רואים אותו יפה כאן, רואים אותו יפה בצד השני. כלומר, החלק הזה הוא הסלע הקשה, הייתה לרצפת המנהרה.
רצפת הסלע הזו המשיכה וכיסתה את כל השטח. כלומר, הכנענים, כשהם חצבו את המערכת שלהם, הם לא הכירו את הפיר עצמו.
אבל רגע אחד, המנהרה הגנה על השואבים כל עוד הם היו מתחת לפני האדמה. אבל מה הגן עליהם כשהם יצאו החוצה אל המדרון החשוף בדרך אל המעיין המבוצר? שני קירות אדירים שיורדים מזרחה לעבר המגדל. הם יוצרים מעבר מבוצר, ומהם מעבר לעבר הבריכה הכנענית, שם ניתן לשאוב מים בבטחה. מכל מה שראינו, המלך הכנעני לא התאכזב הפעם מתוכניתו של האדריכל שלו. תושבי העיר ירדו במנהרה התת-קרקעית עד המדרון, ומשם המשיכו ללכת במסדרון המוגן, עד שהגיעו למעיין המבוצר ולבריכה. מעיין הגיחון, ליבה הפועם של ירושלים. כל מערכות המים הקדומות של העיר ניזונו מן המעיין. בכל הקשור לירושלים ומים, נשארו הרבה שאלות פתוחות. אבל דבר אחד ברור, מפעל המים הכנעני המבוצר והמרשים שנתגלה כאן במקום הזה, מספר את סיפורה של ירושלים בראשית ימיה. הוא שופך אור על התרבות הכנענית העשירה והמפותחת שהייתה כאן בימים שקדמו לכניסת בני ישראל לארץ. I'm standing now on the staircase descending down to the Gihon spring. You can actually hear the sound of the gushing water behind my back. The Gihon spring is the heart of every water system in this ancient city until the Second Temple period, when water was brought from afar via aqueducts. We are also inside the Canaanite Springs Tower. Now this has no significance today, because today the water has an outlet. It is diverted through Hezekiah's tunnel from the First Temple period to the southern end of the city of David. But 1,000 years before the time of Hezekiah, when this tower was built by the Canaanites, such an outlet simply did not exist. So water simply accumulated within the confines of the tower. They reached this level, and at this point, the Canaanites diverted them into the Canaanite channel, or channel number 2. Let's go into channel number 2. I'm now standing inside the Canaanite channel. Now it's amazing to think that people actually used this channel during the Middle Bronze Age 3,800 years ago. The reason I stopped here is because we have here another channel coming out of the main one. This little channel, also known as channel number 3, is a feeder. It takes water from the main channel and feeds the bottom of the Canaanite reservoir we mentioned earlier. But most of the water is diverted by the main channel to the south, to the area of the Siloam pool. So let's go there. The Siloam Channel was hewn deep into the bedrock from north to south along the Kidron Valley, and it led water from the spring to the pool of Siloam. But somewhere along the way, such as right over here, we can see that the channel was dug so close to the outer surface of the bedrock that we can actually look into the channel right from here. And what we see here is the rock scarp, which is the outer wall of the channel, and here's the channel inside, right behind this cage. We believe that water was taken out from here, diverted outside to irrigate the fields of Jerusalem during the Canaanite period. I'm now standing inside the pool of Siloam, at the southern end of the city of David, right at the foot of the cliff on top of which the city was built. And over here we can see steps belonging to the pool from the Second Temple period. Excavations conducted not too far away from me revealed the remains of a large wall, a plastered wall, a dam wall from the First Temple period. That means that we should be looking for the First Temple period pool probably right here. What about the pool of the Canaanite era? Was this also the final destination of the Canaanite channel from the Middle Bronze Age? Probably it was. We know that because right over there on the cliff we can see a rectangular opening which is the outlet of the Canaanite channel. Now, during the Second Temple period, and also during the second half of the First Temple period, from the 8th century on, we know there were massive walls protecting this pool. What about the Canaanite period? We have no such wall from the Canaanite period, and therefore we assume this pool was only accessible during times of peace. During times of siege, the Canaanites had to rely on another system, and that is the Canaanite fortress we've seen earlier.